So at the beginning of this summer, the very first Sunday of this summer, in fact, I also preached. And on that day, I shared a story with everyone, a story from my life of how back in my undergrad, one of my college professors counseled me away from continuing after graduation into a master's program in our shared area of study. You all might remember me giving that sermon. Now, I described then, as I will briefly right now, the very unnerving feeling of aimlessness that conversation gave me, and how I ended up graduating undergrad without a plan as to what was next. I stepped off of that stage, I had my diploma in hand, and I did not know what I was doing next. My graduate school plan was on the drawing room floor, and I was just kind of lost. Admittedly, it was not a firm plan. I have to admit that. It was not cut and dry in any way when he and I sat down for that meeting and he said, "I really don't think you should do this." I had had some thoughts in mind as to what this plan might be, but it was still very much in its infancy. But in my defense, it was an infancy that took 2 years to get to. 2 full years of quiet growing and searching, of questioning and exploring, building up and shooting down, just to make it to that very loose bullet point idea that I had. And it took 2 years, I think, because this wasn't just some plan. This wasn't just what I was going to do on some Saturday afternoon. It was a plan for the rest of my life, perhaps. And so it took a great deal of effort to get there. And when it was cast down, I was not feeling good. I felt pretty distraught about it. In retrospect, a much more mature, wise David would say that I needed a period of time to grieve the death of this idea that I had, of this life that I would have, and not immediately jump into, well, what's the next thing I'm gonna do? So after graduation, while I had friends who were going on to internships and fellowships, who were going into graduate school, who were going to be starting exciting work in their field, I was not. I had this interlude in my life after that. And here are some things that I did in that interlude. In that first fall after graduation, I TA'd for one of my professors, one who took great pity on me, God bless her. I worked at an LL Bean call center, taking orders for Christmas gifts. I taught church school. I did 2 rounds with AmeriCorps. I worked at a summer camp several times. I had a somewhat more professional job as a youth counselor with Goodwill. I cleaned houses. And then finally, I returned to my alma mater to work in residential life as a building director there. That was the last job that I had in that time before I went off to seminary and moved down here to Massachusetts. It was a 4-year interlude of figuring it all out. And times were not always fun. In fact, sometimes they were pretty darn far from it. In those years, I moved 3 times. I very foolishly bought a brand new car. Don't know why I did that. Don't do that, please, ever. That was a mistake. I made as little as $8 an hour at one point. I was on food stamps for a bit. I had successes. I had a lot of failures. And looking back at that as the road that led me to life as I live it now here today, I truly do not begrudge that interlude. I mean it when I say I have come to love those years and bless those years as far as I am able, and that there is not much that I would change, knowing that changing would affect this life as I live it now, a life that I equally love and equally bless. Now, I don't share this as if I think I've discovered some golden treasure that I'm sharing with you that you've never heard of before. I share it because I think it's a pretty common experience to look in the rearview mirror of life at a rough, difficult time and to bless it in some way. Be it a job, a relationship, a living situation, a challenge, or a single decision that led to or was a lot of roughness and difficulty, to bless it despite all of its difficulties, gathering up everything, the good, the bad, the easy, the hard, the celebratory, and the cringeworthy, and choosing to be at peace with it so that you can grow, so that you can evolve, so that you can become. Because when we look in that rear view mirror of life, we have two options, actually. We have two things that we can do. One of them is the blessing that I just was talking about. And it's a heck of a lot better than the other option, which is the cursing. Looking in the rear view mirror of life and cursing a time for its difficulty, for its roughness, for its hardness, for how cringy it kind of was, for the bad decisions that made it up. Cursing it. The problem with this, with looking into the mirror and cursing, is that it is nearly impossible to curse rough times without cursing ourselves too in some way. Because we're not just cursing decisions or moves or situations, we're cursing our decisions, our moves, our situations. And when we toss that bathwater out, surely the baby is still in there, ourselves. And granted, we do make bad decisions at times and need to live with the repercussions of it. We do make moves that seemed acceptable in one moment and then proved not ideal in another. But cursing years of aimlessness and difficulty, of writing them off, of resenting them for their aimlessness, their challenge, just getting rid of them, it's not good for your head. It's not good for your heart. And it's not the best biblical living either. So walk with me here. Jeremiah is sent to the potter's house to watch skilled hands at work. The wheel spins, and as it does, a shape begins to form. The clay climbs up, and the bell of a vase begins to open, but as it spins, it begins to teeter, and then slumps, and then falls in on itself. The potter stops. They look at the small pile sitting there, which for a moment was building into a vase. Then they start again. Jeremiah is told this is how God's hands shape our lives and how God reacts when things aren't quite right, don't quite make the shape. And for me, the most important part about this metaphor, the linchpin to it all, is not even named. It's taken for granted and quickly passed over. In truth, God as the potter of humanity is somewhat of an obvious metaphor. In fact, it's one of the very first ones we get. In Genesis, in the garden, we first see God scooping up clay and forming the Adam, the earth creature, the dirt creature, you and me, us. God as potter is the beginning of it all. So when Jeremiah brings it up, again, he is, I don't think, sharing some precious gem that no one else has discovered before, but he's offering it for a different reason. Jeremiah goes to the potter's house to witness the potter doing something that God also does with humanity. Because when the pot is spoiled in the potter's hands, when the clay does not take the shape hoped for, strays from its confident forming, and then in disappointment or frustration, the potter stops the wheel, something happens. The potter scrapes and kneads the slumped over clay and does not throw it away, does not toss it aside or leave it on the floor to dry out and ruin. It is with the same clay, the same decision to use this clay, and the same care, holy attention, and imagination. God puts divine hands on it again because this potter values the clay in hand more than the vase or the plate or the bowl, the dish, the jug, or the mug that does not yet exist, while the clay surely does. God, as the potter of our lives, loves that which makes us up, has hopes for us and dreams for us, goals for us, and searches them out in what we can be formed into. And when it doesn't turn out quite right, when it all comes slumping down, God does not abandon working with us. Even if, as the passage says, we choose evil, God still puts hands to work. The vase does not form. It doesn't work out. It slumps and crumples and falls over. And so, in knowing something about the medium, you and me, our lives, God reworks it into another form, something good to skilled and attentive hands. Nothing is wasted, not even time. And if such a thing, if such a practice, if such a way of creating is good enough for God, good enough to keep working with the gray-brown pile of us, believing that there is still something of beauty and strength and grace still unformed within, good enough to keep and not abandon, good enough to bless with continued care and attention, why on earth would it not also be good enough for us? To look at our roughness and our difficulties, regrettable choices and aimlessness, and believe that despite it, there is still something in there worthy of drawing out with our attention and our love. Not for blind optimism, not for ignoring our challenges or the repercussions of them, but for hope and for peace that yet the wheel spins and that which could have been, or that which regrettably was, is not the final sentence, not the total judgment, not the reason to be scraped up, tossed aside, left to waste. On this Labor Day weekend, truly choose to have faith, to see your life as ever forming. The good and the bad, the easy and the hard, the cringeworthy and the celebratory, to see it as God's holy labor on us, God's holy labor on our lives. To give thanks for the shaping and the reshaping, the kneading and the spinning, the starting again, and this ongoing belief that it is worth it, that we are worth it, that you are worth it, even when you don't look quite right, or it didn't turn out quite the way you had hoped. Because if your life is worthy of divine hands upon it, then it is certainly worthy for you in turn to love and bless it for what it has been, for what it is right now, and for what new shape may just now be beginning. Amen.